let's see. I want to make sure we could hear you, so I'm going to unmute. There you go.
There I am.
Thank you so much for joining us this evening to talk about your uncle.
No, talk about a war, I think, maybe. My uncle, indeed.
Yeah.
He really represents the experience of quite a few men at that time.
Yeah, but I mean,
icon, I think.
What gets me about his story is that he already served his war.
What?
He already
served his war, yeah. Yeah. Came home, went to college, and went on the GI Bill, actually, and as a member of the ROTC, and then returned to war. I don't think his expectation or anybody's expectation at that particular point was that there was going to be a war. That was a surprise, I think.
Yeah.
Not in its immediacy. I mean, by the time my uncle was in Japan, which was by August, there was every indication we were going to go to war, and we were in a war. But I think in 1949, when he went back into the service, that wasn't the expectation.
Absolutely was not the expectation. We are live on Facebook and on YouTube.
Mm-hmm.
Hello, Facebook. Hello, YouTube.
I think we're just about ready to start letting people in.
All right, let's do it. Let's do it. It is wonderful to see everybody this evening, this Monday, May 31st, 2021, Memorial Day, or as my mom used to call it, Decoration Day. I'm Todd DiPastino. I'm the director of the Veterans Breakfast Club, and I welcome you all to our special Memorial Day program. With me is Sean Hall, who's our director of programming, and Ellie DiPastino, who might be related to me, and she is our media producer. And, you know, I'm guessing that many of you were at events, Memorial Day events this morning, or earlier in the day, and I was in Brentwood, and it was so wonderful just to be out with people and to be out, in the community. And Brentwood is a neighborhood of Pittsburgh here. It was a neighborhood ceremony. There were young families with little children. There were teenagers who were singing. There were older veterans who were sitting. It was just a real community event, and the sun was shining. And I thought, I don't say Happy Memorial Day, and I don't think that's a proper greeting. And, it doesn't kind of capture the somber quality and the serious and the importance and the gravity, I think is the word that we're looking for, the gravity of the holiday. But I would invite people to have a good Memorial Day. Because this morning I was thinking in that sunshine that there's a reason why Memorial Day is in the spring. Memorial Day is a quintessentially American holiday, second only, I think, to Independence Day, the 4th of July. It emerged spontaneously, women's movement, when men were not into it. It was a women's movement of wives and daughters and mothers and sisters going out spontaneously to decorate the graves of fallen servicemen in the months and years after the Civil War. And there's tremendous symbolism to the idea of decorating graves with flowers. Tremendous, it comes from a Christian tradition of renewal, rebirth, and of, I think, a recognition that the life we enjoy is the flowering result of the sacrifices that have been made of people who came before us. And it is our duty to honor those people, and also a duty, I think, to embrace the life that we have because of them, because of the work that they did and the sacrifices they made. So that's my little lecturette. Hi, Don Nemchik. How are you? Yes.
Thanks. Thanks, Todd. We good to go?
Oh, good to go.
Okay, good. So just real briefly, again, thanks for having all of us again on a Memorial Day. Two things. I often struggled with Memorial Day because we have since 1966 done a ceremony at the McKeesport Boys Club for the 23. And a lot of us fellows talked about it. The family, the Gold Star families, other veterans. Those boys would have wanted us to have a barbecue, a ball game, have fun, go to a concert. Don't be somber. Certainly salute them, remember us, but don't cry for us. Move on with your life. We didn't move on with your life that we did not have, and that put me at peace for a long time because I was struggling with it. And today, of course, is a day that many of us look back and remember our buddies and family members, etc. But it's not a day to. It's a day to be somber, but not a day to be withholding having a good time because they would have wanted us to have a good time today. They fought for us, be it in World War II, Korea, Vietnam, wherever. They fought for us. They're not having that good time. They want us to replace it. And that's how I feel today. I just wanted to interject that today and let the others think about that a little bit because, just be honest with you, I did struggle with it for a long time.
Absolutely.
It was a bad day for me.
Absolutely. I think it's a hard day for a lot of
It is.
veterans.
It's a very hard day.
It's
I
a hard day.
stand next to a woman every Memorial Day whose father was killed when she was 6 months old in 1966.
Oh.
She never misses a ceremony. She hugs us. She's cheerful, and she brings her family now. And she always tells us, the one thing I always wanted to have is dinner with my father.
Oh.
She never misses. So those are types of things that stay with you, and it's tough to take sometimes, but you have to overcome it by being together and realizing the fact, as I repeat, those men wanted us to have a good time, and they would have had a good time if they were here. So you have to do it in their stead. Again, I just don't want to go too far with that. Let others speak, of course, but it's always a tough day, but you have to soldier on, like they say.
Don, and it's, I didn't get teared up until you told me not to cry. I didn't realize what a hard day this was for veterans until I was working with veterans for a while. It took me a while for me to catch on what this holiday was all about. I grew up considering Memorial Day a 3-day weekend.
Sure. Many people do. And just to take this one step further, we do our ceremony at the McKeesport Boys Club. My cousin's brother authored a poem today. So he was going to do that poem on the steps of the Boys Club. He teared up and had to stumble a little bit because when he was done, he told me, he says, Don, this is where my brother Mike used to walk me down the steps. I'm standing here now doing a poem in his memory. It gets rough, and you have to just move on with it. But,
you have to.
It's just that type of thing for veterans, particularly because there's guys that you stood next to that are no longer here.
And I hope this evening in the course of this program that we could talk and share memories of people that you remember and think about on Memorial Day and other broader meanings that we might have for Memorial Day. But I do want to let people know that we're going to be covering two wonderful subjects from Memorial Day. The first is First Lieutenant Robert C. Styslinger, who was a Pittsburgh who fought in the 96th Infantry Division in World War II in Leyte Island, Philippines, and then in Okinawa. Went on after the war to go to Duquesne University, our local Catholic university here in Pittsburgh. He graduated, I believe, in 1949, and then was immediately called in to active duty for the Korean War, where he died on November 29th, 1950 in the Battle of the Chosin Reservoir. His remains went missing and were only returned in the 55 boxes that arrived in the summer of 2018 from North Korea. And his remains were detected in one or more of those boxes. And he's being reburied, or maybe, I guess, buried for the first time. CC buried for the first time at Arlington National Cemetery on June 18th. And we have CC Sheridan here, who is his niece, Robert Styslinger's niece. And we also have representatives and researchers from Duquesne University, Don Accomando, who's the director of military and veteran students. And we have Megan Hanlon, who's an archivist, and Tom White, who is the chief archivist at Duquesne University. So we're going to be talking about Robert Styslinger and his legacy. And then we also have, we have Moki and Brendan Foster. And we may have Megan also here from the National Veterans Art Museum. and they're going to be kind of walking us through and presenting us with a special program that they have for Memorial Day at the National Veterans Art Museum in Chicago. So I'm really grateful to so many of you for sharing part of what for many of us is a day off with us here this evening on our program. But I'd like to start with Robert Styslinger, and I want to start with Cece, if you wouldn't mind. Cece, tell me about how you learned that your uncle's remains were found in those boxes that were returned.
Well, a certain degree of humor, and I think what happens in the restoration of the missing in action that have been brought back to the United States for burial is there's a contact person who is the oldest living member of the family in direct relationship to the person being brought back. And I'm the generation after Robert, obviously you can see. And I am the oldest grandchild in a family of 52 grandchildren.
Oh, geez.
Yes. And he was my godfather.
Oh, he was your godfather.
My
I didn't
godfather,
realize that.
yeah. So I have a real, in that sense, an intellectual relationship with him. But he was very integral to that particular family. He was a kind of person who did kind of original ideas. There were 4 girls and 8 boys in that family, and the 8 boys was depression. 8 boys lived in the same room, and Robert decided he really didn't think he wanted to do that any longer, so he made a bed under the dining room table that was rolled up every night, every morning, and put away, and then rolled out in the morning, and he had his own private space. And he noticed that his mother was constantly making bread, and it seemed a huge part of, almost a burden. And so he decided he was strong, he could make bread. And he started a tradition in that family of passing it down. As he left home, then somebody else started making the bread. So that was the kind of person he was. And he's remembered with tremendous fondness by all his brothers and sisters. So they were always grieving him in some way. And so when my uncle George died, who was the person who was the oldest surviving member, I became the person to be tagged. And, I thought, I was always conscious of this uncle. And I thought to myself, it would be really something if he was returned. But the likelihood was, in my mind, I said, sure, never going to happen. And I was the chairperson for the installation of stained glass at 2 years ago, and we were having an organizational dinner party, and I got a phone call, and that phone call was from the Department of Former Wars, and they told me in the midst of preparing dinner for 12 people that my uncle Bob was returned.
Oh my. And I'm sharing an article here from the Chicago Sun-Times that has a picture of what the boxes look like that were returned from North Korea. And it took a while, I think, for the identification process to
2 years, at least 2 years. My uncle was identified in 2019, so the end of 2019. I was informed in 2019 that his remains had been discovered. And the way they discover such remains is really a complicated thing, but it is a reflection of scientific advancement in the sense that it's all based on DNA. So what they're searching for is a DNA match between family members and the returned remains. And so two of his siblings had left blood samples, and 3 cousins. So when they called me and said tentatively, we're just trying to identify who the oldest person is. And are you Cecilia Styslinger Sheridan? I said, yes, I am. And they said, we're investigating Robert Styslinger. I said, I'm the oldest. And they said, okay, we just wanted to make sure. And then I got a phone call, of course, in the midst of this dinner party, that he had been found. But his discovery was a result of a very complicated system of DNA identification and then matching.
And, his remains were found 70 years after his death.
Yeah. Yeah.
Can you express what it's like for a family not to have remains?
Yeah.
Does it make a difference? What difference does it make?
it made a big difference to this family because they were so close to each other. So, as each of them has died and been buried, then there's been an assembly of the family. And like I said, I'm the oldest of 54 grandchildren, so you get a kind of an idea what that means. And this was never possible. The really poignant element in it is he was the first of my grandparents' children to die and the last to be buried.
Oh boy.
So you get, and it was never out of mind. He wasn't forgotten. I mean, as soon as I got the phone call, my first thought was Uncle Bob, and so we were, he was not a forgotten person. What I find amazing in being the person who's a point person for the arrangements for the funeral is there's now, like I said, 54 grandchildren and multiple great-grandchildren. To this funeral, there are coming complete families that have never participated in a family reunion before.
Oh, wow.
So all of the family out in New York, in Oregon, and Washington State are coming. And then, again, then a family that's spread out between Chicago and Maryland, and points in between. They're all coming.
And this is going to be
families are coming.
The funeral is going to be at Arlington National Cemetery on June 18th.
On June 18th. Now, the deal is when they return the remains, then the person who is the person in charge of choosing has the responsibility to select a burial site. So it could be a private burial site, or it could be one of the national cemeteries in other parts of the country. There's one in Michigan. But you have the option of Arlington. And I'm a consultative kind of person, so I don't make these decisions by my little self. And I consulted, and the last remaining member of the family in that particular generation, as soon as I started talking to her, she said Arlington. And then that was the general consensus. So once it was Arlington, it had to be scheduled. And that was, I'm just amazed by the family result. There's going to be 210 people there. Which has been a surprise to all concerned, including me. I knew the size of the family. So, and they're coming not to party in DC, but to be a part of this funeral and to honor their uncle or their great uncle or their great great uncle.
Yeah, be a part of something very special.
So,
I can't imagine. Cece, I'm listening to you talk. You're so eloquent. You're so clearly well-spoken and smart and all that stuff. Your Uncle Bob would be very proud to have you be the representative. I think.
Thank you. Yeah, no, it was, my father loved him. My grandmother loved him. My sister has a story of, he was lost in action in a situation where there was a little opportunity that anybody was going to be able to go back to the Chosin Reservoir and investigate. That wasn't going to happen. Right. But my sister can remember going to the Pittsburgh Armory with a display with the army filled with caskets with American flags on top of them. And my grandmother going through the entire rows looking for her son. She knew he wasn't there, but she was still there looking. So it gives you kind of a feeling of a little bit about a taste. And I didn't know that story until I started talking about what my contacts had been. And my sister said, I remember this. Wow. And she may have been all of maybe 4.
Cece, I learned of this story because of Don Accomando, and I want to bring him into the conversation. Don is retired Air Force colonel and is the director of military and veteran students at Duquesne University. Don, thank you for alerting me to this story.
Well, Todd, it's really I and everyone listening that should be thanking you, Ellie, Sean, and the team, because you afford such a wonderful platform for so many to share these heartwarming stories of sacrifice and dedication. So on this Memorial Day, as Don Nemchek pointed out, many of us are partying, throwing a party. Thanks for allowing us to be reflective.
Yeah.
That I choose to wish folks a reflective weekend, hoping that they'll slow down. So thank you all for providing this platform for so many wonderful stories. And Yeah, I was quite blown away when Sarah Sperry, the director of alumni engagement, shared Cece's story. And Cece, it's so great to physically see you. We've talked on the phone, but
Yes,
see you in person. And I agree with Todd how eloquent. It must have something to do with the Duquesne alumni roots, huh?
of course. I got my master's degree at Duquesne.
Okay.
Surely it's
and-
Duquesne.
Yeah, and it didn't take long for me at Duquesne in the Office for Military and Veteran Students to see and feel the dedication to country, the sacrifice to country that came from Duquesne University. And it's not just Duquesne; it's every school in the city of Pittsburgh, Western Pennsylvania. We're such a giving community, but to see and the wonderful oral history that Cece had put together, the letters, the touching letters, and who he was. It was really just a magnificent story. And again, Todd gives me some of the credit. Really, the credit goes to Tom and Megan, because they're the ones that actually dug up this wonderful picture and others. So again, Todd, thank you for allowing to share this piece of the story.
Yeah, Duquesne University is very faithful to the memory and the sacrifices of its veterans, and I think that's so. That's reflected in the fact that all the three of you from Duquesne are here. I said to Cece, I don't think we were live yet. Before we went live, that what gets me about Bob Styslinger's story is that he had already fought a war. He had served in combat in the 96th Infantry Division in the Philippines and Okinawa, and then gets called back. And there's just something.
Well, that's a good question, because he actually went to Duquesne as a member of the ROTC. So at graduation, he was commissioned. I don't think, that he had been to war. He knew what war meant, and he had a commitment to the country. Was my feeling about it, that this is where he had found himself as an adult, and he went back to fulfill the responsibilities of an adult.
Let me ask Megan Hanlon, archivist at Duquesne University, and also Tom White, archivist, what you learned in researching about Robert Styslinger's
You'd like
life.
to know, too. Yeah.
Sure. I mean, we uncovered quite a few things from the 1941 to 1942, like kind of World War II lens. We couldn't find a lot, but we know that Duquesne students were talked about a lot in the Duquesne newspaper. So we get a lot of stories, and I think even in the Duke, there's like addresses of the people who were at basic training or wherever they were stationed, and stories that were sent back. But then in 1946, when Styslinger was re-enrolled at Duquesne, he got really involved in all these different social organizations. He's actually the president of the Newman Club, which was a Catholic ministry organization. And they did things like hosting religious and social activities, communion breakfasts, charity fundraisers. I think they had their own like baseball team and theater group. So they all did a lot together, and he was the president of that. And he was also an Alpha Epsilon fraternity member. He was a part of Scabbard and Blade. So he did a lot. And I think that shows too, probably learning a lot of leadership during his time in World War II, and then bringing that to Duquesne as the president of the Newman Club, which is pretty cool. And then obviously taking that leadership with him to Korea.
Yes.
That's really interesting to me, because I had seen that little piece of note someplace and I hadn't gotten affirmation. So you've been very helpful to me right this moment in time.
Great.
I'm grateful. One of the things in the letter that you probably read is that he said to his sister, and it was the one part of the letter that was really straight. He said, "I'm not afraid." He said, "A lot of people here are really afraid, terrified." He said, "But I'm not afraid." And that was 4 days before he died.
Oh boy.
So, and in some sense, the kind of commitments he learned at Duquesne made him the kind of person who could say with great confidence, "I'm not afraid," and to assure a sister who loved him, that his death was not going to be something that they should be distraught about. I think that was a way of saying, you know, I'm not afraid of what's happening here or what's going to happen to me.
Here's a great picture that I think includes him from Duquesne. And it looks like the 1949, 1948, maybe. These are
Yes.
young.
Okay, so to your left, right behind the last sitting individual in a light gray suit is Robert Styslinger. Right,
So
no, the first row seated, right, go to that person and directly behind him on his right.
on his right,
Yes, right there.
right there, there he is.
There he
Okay.
is. Yes, you found it. I haven't seen that picture before. So yes, that's Robert.
Isn't that great? And what group is it? The original group of bachelors.
Yeah, this was from the Alpha Epsilon fraternity.
Yeah.
that he was in.
And he was
Those-
one of the founding members. Yeah.
Those were the days when the priest was there to look after you, to make sure that, you know, things didn't get too out of hand. Boy, what you know, you look at a picture like this, you realize so many of them were probably back home from the war.
Yeah.
And you wonder, each one of them has a story. What a great picture. And I want to share also other pictures that I have. Boy, my machine is slow tonight, but that must have come, it must come from your family, Cece, because they're really great family photos. Let me share this.
That'd be great too.
Let me share this one. Yeah, I'm guessing these are your other uncles and aunts and maybe your father.
Yeah, there's four. Yes, my father's there. Also a Duquesne graduate, William Styslinger. Yeah, my father is on the right-hand side of the picture, looking at the picture. He was in the Air Force. Bob is on the left-hand side in his uniform that he would have been worn while he was in training.
Right.
And the central picture is my Aunt Grace and her husband. And then to the lower left, looking at the picture, is my Uncle Tom, who was also in the Army Air Force and was shot down over Germany and spent 18 months in a prisoner of war camp in northern Germany. And he has an interesting story. And then my Uncle Jim, who was who graduated in 1945 in June, and 2 days later joined the Navy.
Yep.
For the end of the war. So that's that. There they are. Tom's story is interesting. That Pittsburgh is an immigrant city, and this story could only come from such a place. But he was shot down over southern Germany, and they all, most of the people survived, and they parachuted and landed, or just fell out of the plane, in a farmer's field, and the farmers attacked them, and a group of military people came and gathered them up and removed separated them from the farmers, and they were then processed, and they were part of the Geneva Agreement, and they told their rank and serial number, etc. And then he was set aside. They said the commandant of the camp wants to interview you. So he was thinking, oh, something sad's going to happen now. So he went into this office. This is the story as he told it to me. Went into the office, and the person sitting behind the desk said, please close the door. And he sat down in a chair. He said, please sit down. So he sat down in a chair. And this man said to him, well, how's the family? So he was a second or third cousin. And the German family was really conscious of the American family and had maintained their interest in it. But the American family was like this portion of it, and was more disconnected. So it was a real surprise. And then he said to my uncle, I can't keep you in this camp. He said that would be considered an unacceptable situation, but I can make sure that the people who are in your crew are taken care of. So what do you need? So then, so there was a couple of people with broken arms and had hurt themselves on the crash. And so they took care of all the medical needs, and then they sent them on to the next processing station, not keeping them in that camp. But that's America.
That's a wonderful story, Cece. I've never heard anything quite like that.
Yeah, well, just when he was telling me the story, I was actually, when I was in graduate school at Duquesne, and he said, how's the family? And I thought, oh my.
great. They say hi.
Yeah,
I mean, what,
exactly. That's
what do you
right.
say? Oh my gosh, that is so.
They have, so the family was spread through the Air Force, Army, and Navy for that war. My aunt, I don't know if she was the first person to go or not, but she was essentially an Army nurse, and she spent her war in England.
And
So,
now tell me about this picture.
it's the wedding of my mother and father.
Oh,
The bridesmaid is my mother's sister, and the groomsman is my Uncle Bob.
right. And there's Bob right here.
Yeah, Bob right
Yeah.
there. So now you begin to recognize him. You see him enough, you think, oh, that's him, Yeah.
And that's a close up of the same picture, I think.
One of the things about him is how very much the family missed him. I would have liked to have known him because he must have been kind of an interesting human being in many different kinds of ways, but he certainly was very definite. And your stories from Duquesne have been a delight to me. I'm just like, tell me more.
And I'll ask Tom and Megan, or Don, if they have more that they want to share, or anybody who's on with us this evening, if they have a question for CC or for Tom or Megan or Don. I just think it's such, do you know anything more? If anybody, I'm going to look around and see if anybody's their hand up or anything. Don, Bob Dvorak. How are you, Bob? It's good to see you.
Never better, Todd. How are you?
Good.
And today is one of those days of mixed feelings. We live life looking forward, but we understand it looking back. Today's a day you get to look back. And sure, we mourn the loss of these people, but they were amongst us once, and we live our lives to honor them. It's a day of mixed feelings, but it's like a little bit, well, it is a wake. You mourn the loss, but you also recall the person and celebrate the life.
That's what it is.
And I think that's what I've been doing, because that's how I think about it. I do know a great deal about the battle in which he died. And I certainly knew nothing about the Korean War until I got that phone call. And that's the suffering. And the contrived suffering is just amazing to me. It was just an incredible.
I was going to say that that battle of Chosin, one of the remarkable battles in U.S. military history, and it was right after Thanksgiving.
Yeah.
And the big push was, well, we do this, we'll be home by Christmas if we can send the Army around the right flank of the reservoir and the Marines around the left, and then we'll hook up. Didn't work out the way the planners thought it would. And the brutal cold temperatures that are unimaginable, 30 degrees below zero, and what those men suffered through, and how they performed. It's just a testament to the American character. So I want to say I'm sorry for your loss, but I also know that he was in a place where he wanted to be, and he was serving his country.
Very much shows it, and he wasn't, like I said, that letter is it's a really interesting letter, and it said that I'm not afraid in a situation that was clearly good cause for fear. I think nobody realized, even on Thanksgiving, the movement of the Chinese forces over the border and the sheer size of the threat. But they certainly knew that they were in a situation where they would be fighting. And to me, the element of poignancy is this, that indeed my uncle died, and indeed many men died, but the sheer size of the loss and the bulk of it being to the weather is an amazing thing to me. That's what moves my heart. But there was a tremendous loss of life on the Chinese side, huge, dwarfing the numbers of the Americans. And yet when the unit my uncle was a part of, task force, now that name just got out of my mind, but it's a task force. There were 3,000 men, 3,200 men, and 800 of them actually made it out of Korea.
Oh my.
So you can some idea of the loss of life. And a good portion of that was from frostbite.
Yes.
And they were poorly prepared for the weather.
Bob was not exaggerating when he said 30 below zero at Chosin Reservoir.
That's right. it was it was amazing to everybody. It was an unexpected addition to the general trauma of war.
Yeah, I want to say hi to Dennis Wojtek. Dennis, I haven't seen you in a long time. You're a Duquesne University professor. I believe you're retired. You're also a Vietnam veteran. Feel free to chime in, Dennis. Does this story mean something to you because of your connection to Duquesne?
Oh, this has been a fascinating story. I can't believe the detail that CC has on all of this. And the fact I have 5 of my buddies whose names are on the wall. So when I get a chance to get to DC, I go down to pay a visit. But their remains were brought home and immediately. So it wasn't that long period of time, and I just can't imagine going through that. And yes, I am retired. I'm still doing radio every night in Sarasota and in a station in Erie.
Well, that's
In the
wonderful.
60s, 70s, and 80s, and of course, bringing back a lot of stories about my time at Duquesne and also as a veteran. And so anyhow, this is Pat. I'm going to shut up and let you guys talk.
Oh, thank you for joining us, Dennis. Yeah, this is such a fascinating story, and you have a wonderful voice. I can see why you do radio. Tony Accomando, Don's big brother. Tony's a Vietnam, one of your Duquesne alumnus. Is that why you're joining us? Because of Robert Styslinger's connection to Duquesne? You're going to have to unmute, Tony.
You're certainly one of the reasons, and the Breakfast Club has done so much good for so many veterans, given the opportunity to tell their stories. And Todd, there's nobody better than yourself in drawing out those stories. Of course, it's great to see Dennis, and I was just on the Rob Pratt show with Bob Dvorak just preceding me. So this is our second go around, and I'm thankful because I am truly a beneficiary of this wonderful man we're talking about, because I graduated from Duquesne in 1966 and got my commission, as did he, through ROTC. And actually, I'm a brother of Alpha Epsilon. So
Fun.
isn't that something? So
Yeah,
he's one of my big brothers. And at some point, I'd like to get that photograph and share it with the Brotherhood, and we continue to stay in touch. But I suspect that that Robert is one of the most noted Duquesne graduates, and my brother has done such a wonderful job in the 9 years at Duquesne, recognizing and helping veteran students and military students as they are there, and then to have it archived, Megan, and working so hard to keep those memories alive. I thank you as well for all of that. And I'm just here just to tag along because I was an AE and my brother invited me, and you did as well, Todd. So I'm just honored to be part of the Duquesne family and the family of who have worn the military uniform of this great nation we call America. So thanks, Todd.
Oh, great. What were you and Bob talking about on Rob Pratt's show today?
Well, we were talking about Veterans Day and Memorial Day, and the need, I suspect. I'll give you from my perspective, and then Bob can chime in, because he is a historian. I was a history major, but Bob a historian. So I should be taking lessons from him even today. He had a great perspective, as he shared with you at the beginning of this Zoom call, about the need to remember. And frankly, I'm perplexed at this stage of my life and in this part of our nation's history, because it seems to me that the one general theme that all those who served in World War II or Korea or Vietnam, or all of them, was love of country. And they wanted to preserve freedom and fight for what this nation stood for and presumably stands for. And it seems to me that our nation is so divided now that it's difficult for me, I'll speak for myself, to get my arms around what this nation now is collectively recognized as, and should be, and has been. And we're just trying to sort out our roots. And so it must be very, very difficult, I think, for today's military. It's similar to Vietnam veterans. So Vietnam veteran came home and no thank yous.
Great. Yeah.
an awful lot of discourse, really, and insults to the Vietnam veteran, to the extent where most Vietnam veterans didn't even say that they were Vietnam veterans, just went on about your lives. But today, I'm just wondering too, with the returning Iraq and Afghan all volunteer veterans, and how it is that they go off to defend this great nation, or the concepts or the beliefs of this great nation of ours, and then come back to the turmoil, as the Vietnam veteran did, the turmoil of the 60s and the upheaval. So
Yeah.
it's caused, I think, for me, tremendous consternation. And as I age, I'm just not sure what to make of it and how to come to grips with it in my life.
Well, if I could say something here. I'm the wife of a retired Navy man, and I have a son who's an active duty Army officer right now. And we went to Mass this morning, and they asked the veterans to stand up, and there weren't very many. And one of the things I think is that the military is more isolated today from the general population. That I think would be kind of significant. As far as my son's service at the present time and his commitment to the United States, there's no doubt about it. He has confidence that he's serving a great nation. And I haven't, in my limited experience, and it's limited, when I have, in general, my son's names come up or my husband's backgrounds come up, I've only experienced interest on the part of the person who's in presence, and in a kind of an enthusiasm or a respect. I told one of my son's stories at an event a couple of years ago where he had been asked to be it was honoring him, and as I was talking, because he was in Afghanistan at the time, as I was talking, people were very, very quiet and very, very interested. But I think part of it was that they recognized what he was doing. At the same time, it was something so alien to their own lives. So if you had been in the war, in the Second World War, you came home, everybody had been in the war. The whole country had been in the war.
Right.
You came back from Korea, there was a lot of ambivalence about it, and it was a disaster. And but they were welcomed back. But because so many people had family members involved in it. But I don't think that's true today. And I think that's the isolation. I mean,
CC, amen. I agree. I think you hit the nail on the head from what I've seen, is that I think people like me who aren't veterans, like Sean, like Ellie, we were talking just before we went on, Tom and Megan, they're not veterans. Moki isn't a veteran. We are really interested, but it is alien. It was alien to me. And, my growing up, serving in the military wasn't something that I thought I would ever do. And so it's kind of like we don't know where to begin to have the conversation, but we want to have the conversation. Bob Dvorak, what were you going to say?
Well, and Tony and Don, good to see you. My message on Rob Pratt's show, and he's a good friend of veterans. God bless him. He keeps the issues out in front. Part of our contract is to remember those people who didn't come back. But it's more than a sacred duty. It's an act of love. These are brothers and sisters. This is somebody's son or daughter, somebody's husband or wife, brother or sister, cousin, a friend. Every day to me is Memorial Day because you never get them out of your mind. But today's a special day because you can share it with everybody else and kind of get the word out. And I wanted to tell Cece that operation was Task Force Faith after Don Carlos Faith. He was the regimental commander in the Chosin Reservoir camp.
He was actually the person. I've lived and breathed this thing for almost a year now. That's my problem, not being able to spit out a name. But the original task force was another gentleman, another officer, and he was killed as the task force was making its way south, and then Lieutenant Colonel Faith was the senior officer, and he had been leading a separate group. He was part of the 32nd Infantry, and the basic structure was the 31st Infantry. And so then when he took over out of necessity, he was handling a mixed group of people, some of whom had not experienced him as a commanding officer before, which I know is very difficult. But his story is an amazing story. I agree with you. Just an amazing story. But he was the third officer of that task force, and his position in that, and his coming into that position, was because the previous officer was dead.
As I say, that was a brutal battle, both in conditions and ferocity of the opposition.
And outnumbered.
Yeah.
Oh, and outnumbered. Yeah, and encircled. Oh, God.
Just an amazing thing.
The 57th Artillery was attached to the 7th Infantry Division in that big push. And I had to haul those guns over those mountains up that trail. And
doesn't it amaze you?
Yeah. Well, the U.S. military can do anything, believe me. But it was a tremendous feat, and something that historians study till this day. The details of that battle.
One of the things I think that's really interesting about it is that neither the group that my uncle was part of, the 57th SAB, and 2 days before he died, they were on the other side of a mountain at another reservoir. They made a journey from the one reservoir to the Chosin Reservoir over a 2-day period, and task force that Lieutenant Colonel Faith was the first group to be moved over the mountain, and the rest of the units joined him later, the day later. And just the idea, and then face this huge battle before they'd ever even dug in any kind of way. So they were really in one of the most difficult situations. I've never been in the military, but I can't imagine a more difficult situation than being in a war in the winter, not having time to dig in, and facing a massive force and opposition.
I think that's the most
Being
interesting.
surrounded.
The most interesting thing I saw when we were researching this in Duquesne was reading about his Medal of Valor and the description of what happened for him to get that medal. And it was in the conditions where he volunteered to go out to this exposed position to direct the artillery strikes to protect the unit. And the guy that was with him radioing in was injured, and he continued on his own basically to call in these strikes. And they were in an exposed position surrounded by tanks and everything else. And that's what's cited on for his Medal of Valor.
Yeah, that was prior to the time of his death too. That was another whole portion of the Korean War. That each time someone tells me something like you're telling me about that, it really makes it more real for me too. Thank you.
Cece, excuse me. My name is Lisa Gross. My father would have been commissioned with your uncle.
Oh,
class of
really?
49. Yes,
Yeah.
which I do the Duquesne webinars, but when I saw the backstory, I was so interested.
Yeah.
He was also a World War II veteran. They all went to school after World War II, but he and my mother were both the class of 49, and he was commissioned that year. So
that's amazing.
And he was field artillery.
Was he?
And he was at Chosin, and all he ever told us was that he was one of the few who survived because he was up in the mountains calling in the firing points. I have his notebook from Korea, and there's lists of people's names in there. So I will comb that. I also have 35 millimeter slides.
Oh,
so
that's great.
you have renewed my interest. I will go dig into all of this to see if I can find anything, because their uniforms then were the green fatigues, but with bright white name tags.
Yes.
Very funny.
That would be marvelous. Oh,
name tags. And so I have those pictures where you can see names. Also, I have his list. So as I was also commissioned out of Duquesne, Daddy commissioned me in 77. And when And these are the few things I have. I say he did not die in the wars, but he died at 61. He was very young. So even as, I was a lieutenant in the Army, but still not mature enough to have the questions that I would have now.
Like to have known, yeah. Yeah.
All those
Oh, that
questions.
would be marvelous if you found some more pictures. I would be so delighted.
I know, I'm so excited. So
Yeah.
I will let you know. I can go through Dawn.
Okay.
Well, Lieutenant Gross, thank you for joining us tonight. And what I want to do is invite you, when you do some research and find some connections, if you wouldn't mind contacting me, I'd love to have Cece and you back together again, especially Cece after your uncle's buried on June 18th.
Okay.
I'd love to hear about how it went. I think we'd love to regroup and hear more about the impact of this return on your family. And Lisa Gross, my email is todd@veteransbreakfastclub.org. Please email me. I want to stay in touch with you because you are a veteran and I want to hear your story and also want to hear your
retiree.
story.
My husband and I have 50 years. 30, he did 30, I did 20.
Oh, then we're going to rope both of you into the Veterans Breakfast Club.
20 years is great.
And we're at Fort Hood. I mean, we're outside of Fort Hood. And so we know that only 1% of the country is in the military. So we're very sensitive to that. But we do have a national cemetery here. Thank goodness. They built it before the Iraq and Afghanistan wars, and of course it's full. But it has given the people in this community don't have to travel all the way to San Antonio to go to a national cemetery. We have our own now, and it's beautiful. And so you still see, you see the flags go up at Christmas. You see the beautiful wreaths go up. There, you see it in our community, but I know it's hard to see it in Pittsburgh.
Yeah.
It's just not a military town except for Oakdale.
We have some people here who might disagree with you, Lisa, a little bit. For a town that doesn't have a major military installation, Pittsburgh has a lot of active veterans. And
That's good to
it
hear.
It used to have 2 VA hospitals. So that's how many veterans were in Pittsburgh. All my uncles were veterans, every one of them.
And we now do have a national cemetery too, the National Cemetery of the Alleghenies, which is very beautiful.
Oh,
But
wonderful.
I'm very chauvinistic about Pittsburgh, Lisa. So that's my
That's good to hear. That really is very good.
I'd like to, let me jump in real quick.
Yes.
One last thing. I'm just fascinated. I haven't seen Lisa since 2017. She came back to her alma mater, and she visited with another family member who my brother Tony would know, and it's Connor Green, an Afghanistan war veteran with his service dog Bradley, another proud Duquesne alum who graduated last year and is now working on his master's, a School of Education grad. So Lisa, it's great to see you again. And thank you for the heartwarming picture of your father's tombstone. Great to be reunited with you.
And Lisa, I want to see you again. And I want to meet your husband. I also want to welcome John Sinetti. Thank you, John, for putting that note in the chat here. John is an Air Force Vietnam veteran, 3 years in Japan, Vietnam era, well, you could say, I say Vietnam veteran, 3 years in Japan, Philippines, and Thailand up to the Laos border. That's a Vietnam veteran, John. So John, I hope you join us again, and please do chime in if you'd like. Tom White and Megan and Don Accomando and Cece Sheridan, thank you so much for sharing your memories of Robert Styslinger. This is really, it's fascinating to me how somebody who died over 70 years ago can bring people together who didn't even know him, but find fascination and inspiration in his story and in your family. Thank you so much.
You're
Cece.
welcome. Thank you for asking me.
This is terrific. And Phil, you could, if you have it's things to go off to do, don't be shy about dropping off the program, but you're very much welcome to stay to hear the next part of our program, which is about a really interesting place, the National Veterans Art Museum, and in Chicago. And I know that you are emerging out of the pandemic like we all are. And we have 3 wonderful representatives, Brendan Foster and Moki Tanoko.
Tantoko. No worries, Todd.
Say my last name.
Tempestino.
Okay, well, you got it right. And then Megan Owwock, thank you so much for joining us. What special event did you have going on for Memorial Day today?
Well, Todd, thank you, and Cece and everyone, thank you for sharing. It was a really quite an impressive conversation, and I appreciate just all of your willingness to share and be a part of it. I was fascinated by it all, so thank you very much, and Lisa too. All these connections, it was amazing. The National Veterans Art Museum, over Memorial Day weekend, we have a program called We Remember, which we've done over the past several years, and really, as a veterans art museum, we obviously we're focused on art created by veterans, but for Memorial Day in particular, we really just focus on remembering, and through our programming, through our events when we were able to meet in person, but the last couple of years we've had to do it virtually. So we actually have a virtual program called We Remember, and we have a number of people who've recorded some talks, discussions about their experience, and people in their families. We have an honorary wall where people can share names. Moki, I don't know if you want to add to it a little bit more in terms of what we do with programming. Before you jump in, though, the other thing that we do every year is have taps played at Above and Beyond, which is one of our signature pieces. And Above and Beyond is 58,307 dog tags. Each one is stamped. We stamped with a 1945 graphotype, which you can see on the right there, with the name, date of death, and service branch of everyone who lost their life in Vietnam. And it's hung in order of date of death. And one of the important things to me, just a short history on it, it was commissioned by the National Veterans Art Museum in the late 90s. That was before the internet. So, they had to get a big book of names and, have the Department of Defense approve it. And they did. And they created this amazing art installation. And then in the mid 2000s, the museum had to move, and we didn't have the space for it's a huge 40-foot by 15-foot installation. And so we didn't have the space to move it to, and then I joined the museum about 6 years ago, and it was still in boxes, and I said, we have to get this up. This is too important. People were calling from around the country saying, I want to see the dog tags, because it's the only memorial outside of Washington, D.C. that has every name, the name of everyone who lost their life in Vietnam in one place.
And I just want to invite people to look at their screen. Look at that installation. It is overwhelming. And Brendan, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I thought of it came to mind that some people say relating to art, that art is a process, not a product. I imagine the process of creating this product was in itself an experience. I mean, how long did it take to hand stamp all those names and then make sure they were arranged properly?
Mm-hmm. It was several years in the making. Initially, I think they started it in 1997, and it was eventually, I think, initially installed in 2001 or 2002. I'm not sure the exact date. And even when we reinstalled it, Megan, there's another picture. I think it's the next slide. This slide here, we actually cleaned and accounted for every name to ensure that it was there. You can see the gentleman has white gloves because it is a piece of art, but we really also treated it as a memorial, as something that is, that is a person's name. That is the son of someone. That is someone that lived in a community. I think I always go back to my mom, and she was in a small town in Northwest Iowa, tiny town. And she knows 5 people that have a dog tag on Above and Beyond. And when she saw it, the emotion that she felt really brought home to me what Memorial Day is. And so we really treated it not just as a sculpture and a piece of art or an installation, but as a memorial. And we did it with the utmost honor and respect. So that at this time of year is so important. And when we're allowed to meet in person, we always have people at the installation to console people. We have a lot of veterans who come by and just, they get extremely emotional, to talk about it, to talk with people. It's very important to us as an institution, but I think to our nation as a memorial, as an opportunity to reflect.
I love this quotation about the exponential loss. And it's so true. It made me think that seeing all those dog tags, the 58,307 of them, that's the beginning of the suffering, not the end. That's just the beginning. Those are the first lives that are directly impacted by war. Every one of those people has a mother, father, brother, sister, cousin, friend, loved one. I mean, it radiates out from there. The number of people who are affected by loss in war is profound.
Yeah, and going back to one of the things that you had initially asked Cece right off the bat was, what difference has it made for her to have her uncle's remains back? And I certainly can't compare this to that, but it's one thing to just have that memory of someone or to think about something, and it's another to see 58,000 dog tags. The experience is different and the emotion's different, and I think that's a little bit about what the discussion was surrounding Memorial Day and what it means to people. And it is different for a veteran, I think, than I'm a non-veteran, and being a part of this discussion, being a part of the National Veterans Art Museum, I always say there's a line that I'll never truly be able to cross because I'm not a veteran. But hearing these discussions, seeing 58,000 dog tags, hearing the wonderful, amazing story of Cece's godfather coming home, that brings me at least a little closer to that line and a better understanding of what Memorial Day is. And it really has changed my perspective. And I think I can speak at least to some extent for my staff because they're non-veterans as well. And so I do want to open up to them. I don't want to steal their time. Moki is our education coordinator, and she's part of what we want to do as an institution to connect these dots for veteran to veteran, non-veteran to veteran, and to really better understand this experience.
Thank you, Brendan. And Megan, if you could go to the Charles Shoby class of 67. I know in this virtual space in which we can't be together, it was really important for me to show you the inside of the museum, which is the photos that we're looking in here, because it's a very different experience to be looking at these images and of these artworks online versus in person. But one of my favorite artworks here in this exhibition, which features selections from our permanent collection, which is over 2,500 pieces of veteran created artwork. And as a nod to the founders of our museum, which are the Vietnam Veterans Art Group that had a showcase of their artwork in 1981. So you think about here as a group of veterans creating artwork about their experience. And it's the first time a conversation about the Vietnam veteran experiences is well received by both the veteran and the civilian community. And that's 1981 already. I mean, it was so well received that it was asked to travel to Washington, D.C., where it got national press at an alternative gallery space there, the Washington Project for the Arts. And a lot of the work in this exhibition is from that original collection. And Charles Shobe was a U.S. Marine. He served in Vietnam. This painting has always been really striking to me. And as you can see, not only the content of what we're looking at, which is we see a white soldier, a black soldier in the distance, and we see them looking on what is the closest to us, which is, we can tell, the boots of the fallen, of their comrades. And the choice of the painting material, right, to have this also very impressionistic style, right, not hyper realistic, but that there's a tenderness there with the light and the colors, that like pastels, it brings you into a time, is this coming to the end of the day or the beginning of the morning? And that kind of moment adds more intensity to the feelings of what these soldiers are looking on, which is added to the title, Class of 67, right? I think about, we were talking about, someone mentioned Memorial Day being in spring, the time of transition and change, but also I think about all the high schoolers that are graduating, all the college students that are graduating. We want this to be, here, Class of 67, Class of 2020, Class of 2021, you want it to be these really joyous celebrations, and you have that on top of this image, right? Because this is a reality for especially the Vietnam veterans, and also in terms of veterans of all wars and conflicts, experiencing the loss of life and that reality of war, and it's an uncomfortable. It's uncomfortable to look at, right? And I think especially as a civilian and working with students that come through the museum, it's uncomfortable to look at and talk about. But I think if we're talking about being close to the line, the artwork makes that space for you to talk about it, right? It creates a pathway for you to let's break down this. And by being able to break down these complicated social issues and these realities, we are able to be more connected because of that.
Beautiful interpretation of this painting. And I want to invite anybody who has a comment or a question to speak up. Could you go to the other one that Charles Shobe did, the elephant grass?
Yeah.
We just found out it's Shobe. I've been
Shobe.
also saying Shobe for about 6 years, so my bad.
Yeah, I'm the king of mispronunciation. I mispronounce my own name. So this is also in a similar vein, impressionistic. Don't know what time of day it is, right?
Mm-hmm.
Do any of our Vietnam veterans remember elephant grass?
Todd, I actually have this is actually one of my favorite paintings that we have, that I often when I go up to Milwaukee a couple of times a year, and they have a veterans event there, and I had an amazing experience this last time that I went, and I had brought this painting there, and there was a gentleman that was standing in front of it, and I didn't know really why I liked the painting as much as I do. And he just stared at it, and I eventually introduced myself, and he talked for about 25 minutes, and he almost broke the painting down by section, and he would talk about the rucksack that he's carrying and the different things that where he would carry things, and he looked at the canteen and he said, a lot of guys did this and we did that, and it's almost like it brought him back there, and he got very emotional, and I'm sure he was thinking of comrades that he fought with, but also that he lost. But the level of detail from this impressionistic piece that he went into in what he saw and what he felt and the impact that it had, it was a really powerful moment for me. And again, it opened my eyes to the different experience that I have as a non-veteran, the opportunity that I have to learn just through art, and through a piece that to me is, three guys walking through tall grass and one guy's carrying a gun.
Yeah.
The level of detail that he brought was powerful for me, and it brought now I look at all of our other pieces in a different way. I just try to find those things. And I was really appreciative of it.
It's beautifully composed. There's a balance to it, and there's also a real tension to it. What is up ahead? What are those two guys up ahead looking at? Mark, you have your hand up.
Yeah, Todd, thanks for recognizing it. What I see, though, as I look at this is not, it's what you don't see. It's that grass is so thick that you're wading through it, trying to get your one foot in front of another is a task. And it's pretty wet in those areas also. So your boots are soaked all the time and you're sinking down into that. And I can feel, the distance between that, social distancing before social distancing was the in thing to do, is done because of just the difficulty, in my opinion, of getting through it.
Yeah, and you didn't want guys bunched up together, so if there was an attack, maybe some of you will survive, and that elephant grass, I think we've talked about this before. From what I've read, that elephant grass could be really sharp and it could cut your skin, and in the hot, humid weather, it could get infected when you're not getting medical treatment. It was a real environmental hazard.
Yes.
And what I can kind of vaguely remember, also you could encounter the enemy hiding in it too. I think it was the conscious awareness that you were a potential victim at all times. But that's all I can remember, is that there would be people hidden in the grass.
It's an unnerving feeling in any environment, I think, not to be able to see where your next step is going. Walking in the dark, walking in high grass, even if you're not in a war, in this situation, you really don't know what you're walking into. Sorry, Moki.
No, I mean, I really appreciate having a very large group of veterans in here, because, when we're at the museum, that's like one of my favorite moments, is that I'm giving a group to some students, some high school students who are reading the things they carried, which we have a permanent collection of artwork, sort of inspired by the book by Tim O'Brien. And then suddenly a veteran will be in the space also visiting the museum and start talking to students. And it's like, it becomes a super incredible intergenerational experience that you don't get in other spaces, right? And it's because of the connection to the artwork. And I just love that it's happening very organically here. And I kind of wanted to jump, Megan, could you go to Lionhearted, please? Because I wanted to talk about, we were talking especially a lot about Vietnam, and that's because of the nod to our founders. This artwork here, which was on the previous slide on the wall, is one of our newest acquisition pieces called Lionhearted. And in it, you'll see that this unique shape which is actually sappy plates, ceramic plates that go in vests, right?
What are they? I'm sorry.
SAPI, small arms. Ooh, Megan, help. Small arms protective insert. Thank you. Yes, I was like, it's right there.
Plates inside the uniforms.
Yes.
Yes. It might be soppy, or maybe
soppy.
Where do they go in the uniforms?
So like in the jacket,
Slide
in the front,
in the jacket,
back, sides. Yep, and they're replaceable.
For what reason? What are they used for?
Bulletproof and trauma impact.
Yeah.
Oh, so are they like Kevlar or something like that?
No, they're ceramic.
They're made from ceramic. Yes.
You can only use them once.
Yes.
Yeah.
But that unique shape is that.
Hopefully
so
you don't use them once.
Hopefully you don't use them once. That is correct.
Hopefully you don't have to use them at all. Yeah.
Okay.
Preferably not at all, actually.
I need to look that up. Okay, great. Sorry.
So, no, it's good because so the choice, again, talking about material choice. So this is a painting by Sean Ganther, who is a U.S. Air Force veteran. He collaborated with Shane Ruiz, who is, I think, a U.S. Army veteran, on this project where they were interviewing veterans, and Sean was painting the portraits after listening to these interviews. And these portraits depicted on these sappy plates are portraits, as you can see, are men, women, all genders, all identities, all ethnicities, right? They're all Iraq and Afghanistan combat veterans, and all different branches, different occupations. But there's 22 of them. And that's to recognize the statistic that 22 veterans commit suicide every day. And I know that especially during the pandemic, we were talking about like mental health awareness, especially, and then in the veteran community, that's always been one of our biggest social issues, but it will be hard to see what the impact of of the pandemic and lack of community, right? Not being able to be together is on. And I know that I have had personal losses in our Chicago veteran community because of suicide, because of this year. And so this artwork is meant to be a venue, right, for people to, maybe you are a veteran and you feel that your experience is really isolating, especially if we're talking about a 20-year war in Afghanistan, right? But maybe you could see someone in here and watch their interview and hear their story, and then feel a connection there. But it's not only for veterans. I think also someone made a beautiful note at the Memorial Day ceremony today, this morning, that I attended, in which, you know, as much as we think Memorial Day for veterans, right, and thinking about the veteran community, but military families, friends, comrades, right? This is also a space for like a loved one to see a story. Maybe that's what their loved one or friend has gone through that they can't share with them yet. So it gives understanding through the preservation of these stories through this artwork.
Moki, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead, Tom.
Oh, my camera went out. Jeez. I wanted to ask you, what is your, and just, you don't have to go deeply into it, but what is it that connects you to the veterans community? You're not a veteran.
I am not a veteran. I'm a civilian. I'm a daughter of immigrants from the Philippines. I ended up at the National Veterans Art Museum. I went to the School of the Arts in Chicago, and I saw an exhibition there called Surrealism in War. And, you know, for someone that got a very expensive degree to understand art and art history, I was really, for the first time, shocked by a whole demographic of artists, veterans, that I knew nothing about. I think the extent of my knowledge when I came to that exhibition was, so veterans are soldiers, and that was it, right? And you know, it was really jarring to me as an American citizen, right, as a voter, to not understand that. And I started volunteering every day because I just wanted to be around this artwork seriously until they hired me. And it's been about 7 years later. That's real. But and because of this, because of the artwork, I really have dived deep into the veteran community because of that. And not to just supplement my research and my understanding to be better at sharing these stories, right? Because they're not mine, but I also feel a sense of ownership of them, because what power there is in being able to preserve the memory of someone through storytelling. And art, visual art, is a form of storytelling. I was, Cece, you mentioned, you know, you were reading this letter, and one of the things about We Remember, our program, that has been really wonderful is that people have been, you know, quoting letters or like giving a moment or a space to remember someone through words or photographs, and like relook at that, right? And I'm not saying we should do that every day, right? But I think that's what makes Memorial Day extra special, is that being able to really take some time to reflect and remember that person and then share that with others. Megan, I definitely want to throw the ball your way, because Megan Owwock is my beautiful, wonderful coworker, but she's an art historian and researcher, and understands the collection like no one else does, because she gets to go behind the scenes there. So Megan, if you don't mind.
Well, kind of jumping off where you started, and Todd's question, you know, how did you get so interested in the veteran story, preserving it, and you know, what's your history with the museum, right? So actually, Todd, you'll find this interesting. I'm going to talk about this painting in a second, but when I was on for the promo, I had mentioned that I don't really come from a military family, right? But I learned yesterday that my grandfather on my dad's side is a Korean War veteran. And I was like, what, Dad? So I'm talking to my dad. You never told me what? I mean, it makes sense, because on that side of my family, I do have a lot of cousins aunts, uncles that are either active service members or veterans, but I never knew that my grandfather on that side was a Korean War veteran. On my mother's side, my grandfather served in the English Army. So, yeah, like for example, last year when we were doing our virtual programming, I kind of, I would always think of my grandfather, but it's very special for me to think of both of them now. And I'm just thinking even back to like, Cece, what you were mentioning about oral histories and sort of familial history that gets lost. And then when you discover it, there's sort of like power of, not only preserving these stories, but uncovering them in this very, I'm going to sound like such a collection manager, but in a very special, magical way. It's like so powerful. And just on this note of like connection, I'm featuring this work here by George Klauba. He served in the U.S. Navy, quartermaster, second class. This series, Nerves on Fire, it is not a direct depiction of his experience, but actually his uncles, and they were World War II veterans. So he himself is a Korean War veteran, George Klauba, but the way that he understood the veteran experience is told in these paintings that are a reflection on World War II and the Pacific Theater, right? Mm-hmm. But here what we see is also this very, if you take a look at the images, right, like what we're seeing is an understanding or an attempt to represent what civilians were feeling at that time. So the piece Pacific Sorrows, calls to mind VJ Day, Victory Over Japan Day, and it's an attempt to understand not only the experience that he is imagining that his uncles went through, but also the other people who were involved. And I could talk about this piece in the collection forever, but thanks for letting me share my story and my connection.
Oh, this is so interesting. Yeah, I mean, you see the sailor's loved one being pierced by the shot, the widow or mother or girlfriend or sister of the pilot, looking on. Yeah, it captures that, what we were talking about, that exponential quality. I want to ask if anybody has comments or questions about any other work of art in the collection or anything else about the museum or anything for Moki. This is good.
Yeah.
Look at that.
I do want to mention, in our time here, we've only showed you a very small part of what's even on display, right? We currently have works on paper, which is incredible because there's some combat paper pieces by an early invasion Iraq war veteran, John Turner. We have a female veteran exhibition of artwork too. And this is also just a collage of like, in person, this is what it's always like for us, right? In terms of veteran programming, youth programming, tours, working, Cult of Valor presentations, art workshops. I miss it.
Yeah.
I see Jim Roberts.
One thing, just an odd comment. We were talking about this on an earlier session you had, I think, previously. As a Vietnam veteran, there's one thing I can't get past of, and that's your initials, NVA. I wish you had a set of initials. No, it's not funny, Todd. It's a
NVAM.
I mean, Veterans National Art Museum or something. I cannot get past the NVA. I never see the M.
I think
you would, if you were to hold 100 veterans, I bet you a lot of them would find that very disturbing.
How about that NVA? National Veterans Art Museum.
or North Vietnamese Army.
Yeah, well, I know, but have you heard that before, Brendan, or is Jim an outlier here?
I've never heard that.
It hit me right
and
between
there
the
is the way it actually started as the Vietnam Veterans Art Group, VVAG, and then it became the NVVAM, the National Vietnam Veterans Art Museum. And then after 9/11, they took one of the V's out to be more inclusive of all conflicts. So we actually have art from
Veterans
World War
National Art Museum or something. I really think you got to consider changing that, because
You think it's a branding
you
problem?
can ask the other veterans that are on, but to me, it's I just can't see the end.
It's also, I want to mention too something interesting. The majority of our collection is U.S. veteran artwork, right? And of course, mostly Vietnam veteran artwork. But even the Vietnam veterans who started our collection, there's quite a few pieces that we have from NVA members.
I would love to see those.
This is crazy. This is crazy story where someone picked up. They were at a campsite. They found an NVA member who was creating artwork and drawings. And I think back to the Pacific Sorrows, where we're also seeing, on the Japanese side, the kamikaze pilot, but then their loved one at home, right? Where remember that there's the good guy, bad guy is a concept that became very unclear after World War II. And I think the veterans of this room can speak to I think veterans experience humanity in a way that not the average person does. So that's just my response to that. That's very unique though, Jim, and I'm going to be asking some people about their thoughts on that.
Me too. But that does remind me to pitch your website. I've been telling people for weeks now to go to NVAM, nvam.org, and check out your website. It is the rare museum that has so much material online and accessible digitally. And it's fascinating material. I mean, you could get lost there. You could dedicate an hour a day and you'll be busy for months and months and months going through that website and looking at all the variety, the diversity of the artists, the diversity of the art. There are photographs, there are three-dimensional pieces, installation pieces, paintings on canvas, paper. I mean, it really is a fascinating representation, I think, of the veteran experience and also the experience of war. I really want to encourage people to check it out. I think it's really one of the great veteran institutions we have in our country. It really is. And the other thing I wanted to say, this painting reminds me of a program that we're going to have coming up on June 9th. Check this out. I'm curious how people might respond to this. We're doing a program with a Japanese journalist and a man named David Wassel, who are working to repatriate, to send back photographs, diaries, materials that were captured from Japanese soldiers, taken from Japanese soldiers in World War II. And I've heard over the years, so many family members of American veterans who have this stuff. They have photographs of like Japanese people, and they don't know what to do with them. I don't want to throw them away. How would we ever find the family? There's like an urge to send them back. And what I didn't realize, and I just learned talking to the Japanese journalist, that there's a real interest in Japan to have some of the families would love to have some of the stuff back as a way for them to deal with closure. And so we're going to have them on, and we're going to talk about how that might be done, how the Japanese government might get involved in this kind of, returning of war treasures, returning of war trophies, returning of the spoils of war. Ren, I'm sorry, I know you have your hand up, and I see Bob Young has his hand up also. How are you doing, Rendell?
I'm doing fine, thank you. Appreciate you recognizing this. I was wondering, do they take written art as besides the paint?
Yep. Absolutely.
Presented in a way besides just on a piece of paper?
Yeah, it goes through a process. We have a committee that does review the artwork and determines whether to accept it into our permanent collection based on what the art is. It has to be proven via DD 214 that it comes from a veteran, and that it's something that we're able to care for in the way that it needs to be cared for. So it does go through a process to become part of our collection. But yes, we do. We have a submission process.
All right, and then you have that submission process on your website?
Yep.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes.
And I did want to say something real quick. There were some comments or questions in the chat that Ellie had put. Above and Beyond is currently at the Harold Washington Library. That's a dog tag exhibition. So if you do come to Chicago and you want to see Above and Beyond, please come to the museum. But if you want to see the dog tags, you have to go to the Harold Washington Library, which is the central library in Chicago, downtown. So it's at a different space than the museum itself. So just in case anyone was wondering. And we do have a kiosk there where you're able to look up the names of every name that's up there, and it'll actually show where the dog tag is. We have about 85% of images of the fallen, and so their picture will come up and it'll show where their dog tag is and give all sorts of as much information as we have on that person: name, rank, date of death, service branch, things like that. So I just wanted to make that clear that we do have people that come to the museum wanting to see the dog tags, and we have to send them back downtown.
Yes, right. Once again, my camera goes off, which means I can't share an image that I wanted to share, I don't think. Mary Klepper, you put a wonderful comment in the chat, and it's just so to the point. We're not a nation at war, we're a military at war. And I think that alludes to something that Cece said earlier about most of the country being alienated from our military. I think that's very true. We're military.
It is a lot of times, like I think about, obviously the population and everything was so different, but when I'm doing my tours, I always think about the population and how many people served during the Civil War, how many served in 1 and 2. And now the number is so small compared to our population. And even many of the military themselves aren't there on the battleground, it's a military at war, not a nation at war anymore. And I think some of us, we tend to forget that, like you, not in the military, we tend to forget that. We only remember parade time or these holidays like today.
Yeah. I want to acknowledge we have 2 World War II veterans with us tonight. We have Bob Young. Bob, and I thought maybe you had your hand up. If you have something to say, please do feel free to unmute yourself and say it. And we have Julia Parsons, both Navy. We have 2 Navy veterans with us. Hey, Bob.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
I was going to say the older generation gets into this Memorial Day thing pretty deeply too. And if you can, I've got a rollator here that I want to try to show you on the screen.
Oh, yes.
What they've been doing for a month here. Can you?
Yeah.
How do you do that?
Well, it's your camera. You'll have to
share screen.
We will spotlight you. If you could get the rollator on the screen, we could spotlight you so people could see the rollator.
The rollator's right here.
Okay. And could you turn your camera towards the rollator so we can see it?
Sure.
That's it. Okay, so we see the top of it. And what about the rollator? Oh, bunting on the rollator.
I live in a place where most of the age is about 90. And every rollator, every cane, every kind of a wheel at all is done by the ladies here who put these things on your equipment. But I took a very small thing. I just got the 2 things there. There's people that have it. It looks like a parade itself coming downtown. And there's over 20 some veterans here, and they had a big dinner for us today, and everybody announced their name and whatnot. So they're taking care of the older veterans too.
Oh, that's so great. And I want to let people know that Bob was on a transport, Navy transport in the Pacific, landed a lot of equipment, a lot of supplies, weaponry, and personnel on many of those islands in the Pacific, including Iwo Jima. And in Iwo Jima, they started recruiting radio men. The Marines lost radio men on Iwo Jima. Bob was a radio man, and they drew straws to see who would go ashore. And Bob drew a long straw, which is why he's with us tonight. And so I think Memorial Day probably means more to Bob than a vast majority of people who ever even fought in war. And then we have Julia Parsons, who was a Navy wave code breaker in World War II. And it's always special to have you guys with us. Thank you for joining us. Are there any other comments or questions we have here? I'm looking around the room. Yeah.
As you know, I'm a member of the Honor Guard of Vietnam Veterans Incorporated, and our group did 6 different functions over this Memorial Day weekend. And the one thing that that surprised me, and I just was so thrilled to see this, was the number of people that brought their children to the ceremonies. And in fact, at one of them, I believe it was either at Queen of Heaven Cemetery or at Forest Lawn Cemetery today, where 2 little children accompanied their parents and placed the wreaths in front of the memorial. It's just heartwarming to see that.
I saw the same thing. Families, and I think it was, that kind of just getting out was such a thrill. That was part of it, but it's wonderful to see that they came to a Memorial Day event. Eric Gillard, how are you?
Good evening. I was born in 1945, right after World War II. World War II, you normally found out about it when you went to the movie theaters and they showed the events what happened during the war. After that time, we got into TVs, and you were bombarded by this on a daily basis. Then it was cell phones, so you were always up to date on what was going on. And I think that's what changed it. We would get more involved, and then we just took it for granted as to what was going on over there. We didn't have to read it in the newspaper. We could see it on the nightly news.
That's right. And you could react viscerally to the images you were seeing. Visceral reaction rather than reading. Very different experience. Thank you, Eric. Robert, could you unmute, Robert?
Am I good now?
Yeah, you're good.
The McKeesport ceremony today with the 23. I'm a Mon Valley guy, and I probably know some of those guys. And I find it a very moving little tribute. It was very good. They just wanted to thank Mr. Nimchak for their work there.
McKeesport is a steel town here, right near Pittsburgh on the Monongahela River. Pretty small town that lost 23 during the Vietnam War. 23 of its residents they're called the McKeesport 23, and they're honored at least once a year in McKeesport. And Don Nimchek from McKeesport lost his cousin Michael, who's one of the second or third maybe of the McKeesport 23 to be killed during the Vietnam War.
I think it was the second.
I think it was the second too.
It was because they read them all today, and all the other little towns.
Yes.
There's Duquesne and Clairton and Glassport, and all of these lost a number of men too. It's not in the 23, it's in the mostly single digit, but they still lost people. It hit the valley pretty hard.
Yes. And there are towns like that. I mean, we did a program that, the other week about the Edison 64. 64 graduates of Thomas Alva Edison High School in Philadelphia killed in the Vietnam War. 64. That is mind-boggling. And I think there are towns and communities throughout the country that suffered similarly. That makes me curious about today. Is there a high school today that has lost, an extraordinary number of people to the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq? I heard of one, Mountain View High School, in I think it's Arizona. It's out west, and maybe it's Washington State. And I want to look into that because I'm just curious about, is there a comparable today, even with our much smaller military and no longer having a draft? My video is lagging significantly behind my audio. I know that, Jim. I don't know what's going on, but I know it's a me problem, not a you problem. One of my many problems. So you know what? Let's end the program. Moki, thank you so much for joining us. Brendan, thank you so much for joining us. Megan and Cece and Don Acamando and Tom White and Megan Hanlon, thank you for, oh my gosh, it's like I'm just disappearing into a puff of smoke here. Thank you so much for joining us for this very special Memorial Day program. Hey, I hope to see you later in the week. Wednesday morning, we'll be back at 9 a.m. I hope you join us. Take care.